Welcome everybody to episode 75 of Door Tunes. So we've been away for a few weeks, obviously, letting the dust settle after our last interview. So I thought, obviously, we're doing another interview. This one is an actual composer, is an artist this time. And I think they'd like to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Paul from a band called 65daysofstatic. We make music, noisy music, mostly in the shape of a band, but sometimes we do soundtracks and weird other experiments as well.
Yes, so you've been around since 2001, so 20 odd years. That's a long time.
It's a really long time, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know how we've managed to stick it out this long, but we are incredibly stubborn. So,
well, I mean, and also you're from Sheffield, so you're from up my neck of the woods, really, because I'm only in Leeds.
Right, cool.
Yeah,
I'm from Manchester originally. Two of the band are from Sheffield, one's from Wales, but yeah, we all ended up there one way or another. And
it's a great little city. It's changed a lot over the years.
It has, yeah. I mean, half the live venues that we kind of found our feet in they're all gone now. And
the Lead Mill?
Yeah, there's something going on with that at the moment. Like either the landlord wants to sell it or the council wants to shut it down. I don't know the full details, but it's in jeopardy, which is sad because
I'm fairly certain that's where. Obviously, we have a mutual friend, Mikey. We've known him for years, and I'm fairly certain me and Mikey went to see a band there years ago called My Life Story. That was a very drunken night. Less said about that.
Proper indie, right?
Yes.
My Life Story. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I was a
wasn't really nice scene back then. but yeah, Sheffield's good for all that.
Yeah.
And Fuzz Club and...
Gosh, that was a long time ago. I'm going to try and find my ticket. I've got a big thing of plastic pocket with all of my gig tickets that I keep over the years. And it's nice to kind of occasionally look back, and because sometimes you forget some of the people that you've seen. So
easily done.
Really, something I wanted to ask you, and this is obviously the big elephant in the room, is so you scored for Sean Murray for No Man's Sky. How did that? I mean, tell me, how did that even to begin it at all? How did it happen?
So they got in touch with us. I think it was probably early 2014. It might have even been late 2013.
Wow, that long ago.
And well, it was basically that what they wanted was to use one of our old songs called Debutante for their announcement trailer. And whenever we get an offer like that, we just sort of check it out to make sure it's not something
legit.
Awful. And they sent us a bunch of concept art and a very sort of excited sort of blurb about what it was they were making. And as soon as we saw some of the art, we were like, oh right, this is cool. Quite something here. So we were like, yeah, of course you can use this song. Do you have anyone to do the soundtrack yet? Because if you don't, then we should chat about that. And I mean, it just turned out that Sean Murray was a long-time fan of the band. So I remember going down to London to meet him, trying to desperately hold on to my kind of networking skills and pitch the band, tell him why we should do the soundtrack. And then he kind of turned up to the meeting doing the same thing, being like, I really want you. It was dead easy. Nice, happy, happy for us that he'd been a fan for a long time. And we've been looking for the right kind of soundtrack project for quite a while. And so just a happy accident, really. And then at first it was a very simple, the first sort of proper meeting. Once it was all agreed, it was like all of the band and Sean and the audio director, who's called Paul Weir. And we all met, and they were like, "Yeah, cool. Like, we don't even want to give you a brief. Don't overthink it. We just want it. Just like make a 65 Days of Static album, because that's the sort of sound that we want." And then almost tacked on the end was a sort of like, "Oh, and by the way, once you've done it, we're gonna like make it infinitely long." And we were like, "Hang on a minute, that last bit sounds really interesting." And so we sort of just hustled our way into the mechanics of actually sort of making this stuff. Anyway, and I'm getting ahead of myself probably.
No, and how exactly did you kind of? I know that obviously 65 Days of Static as a band, you know, you do your thing, you know how to do that. You've been doing it for a long time. But how did you approach kind of No Man's Sky? Because as you said, you kind of were kind of brought in with sketches of what they were looking to do, etc. So how did you kind of think, right, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it? And then with what they said at the end about it being infinitely long.
Yeah. Well, we began, like we had this big meeting. We chatted about all of our back catalogue, and then various bands that us and Paul Weir and Sean were all fans of, and various soundtracks. And we kind of, after a few backs and forth, like I think they maybe put together some playlists of our material, and we kind of got a sense that when they said they wanted a 65 Days of Static soundtrack, they really wanted quite a particular flavor of what we do, because frankly a lot of what we do is far too noisy and weird to soundtrack such a big game. But what they really wanted was the sort of more melodic, the kind of grand, sort of often a bit melodramatic, big chord progressions, and noisy, sure, but in a kind of
melodic, warm way, rather than some of the sort of more abrasive stuff that we do. And that was fine, you know, like you kind of like pared it all down. It was interesting because it wasn't the direction that we had been going in as a band. Like thinking we were just going to start writing a new record, it would have been very different. But then suddenly, No Man's Sky came along, and so that was kind of the first step, I guess. And obviously, Debutante, the song that an old song of ours that they'd originally used for the trailer, was a big touchstone for all of us. And that's one of the very we have a very few number of songs that have vocals, and that one has vocals by Debbie Clare, a friend of ours. So we got her back in for some of the No Man's Sky stuff. So that was all kind of the preliminary thinking, and then with the whole infinite thing, like at the beginning, because of various deadlines at their end, we just needed to do a lot of straight up composing very, very quickly. So what we did is sort of what we do anyway, because we're mostly like almost entirely instrumental band, because we work with a huge amount of electronics, as well as being a live band. We're quite used to, when we're writing songs, you know, a song that might start as a little piano refrain will end up as this huge like electronica track, or vice versa. You know, like these big break beats eventually get stripped down to some guitar chords. Like, you know, these things get like we're quite used to that. And previously, our working practice was just very merciless, and we would constantly jettison things that weren't working and wipe old hard drives and so on. So with No Man's Sky, we just sort of employed our usual writing practice, but we kind of kept everything, and forced ourselves to be a bit more organized, and you know, so like it's not just kind of turn up at the studio and just, you know.
yeah. So a song that might start as a piano thing that slowly evolves into this big electronic monster, we would keep the piano thing, and we would record the piano thing, and that would go in this folder, and it would be called, you know, this song. piano takes, piano version, and whatever. And so we would just build up all these things, and if we would write half a dozen melodies, and when you're writing a song where there's only space for one, then the other five eventually just kind of get lost, but they would then become variations that we would put aside. And so basically, while we were writing the album, the sort of more conventional album, it was all based around 12 songs on that record, on the sort of main record. Fully fledged listenable songs that stand up in their own right. They kind of got the soundtrack-esque, but they're like, okay, this is a song-shaped song. But every one of them basically had this library of either sound palettes or melodic variation or actual recordings of the band and so on.
It's a cracking soundtrack, and to be honest, I couldn't really imagine anything different now. It must have been really proud. You must have been really proud when you kind of saw when it was released to the public and they saw the original trailer. Everybody went mental about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It was amazing, but it was also made us quite apprehensive because when the trailer went live, it was great to have our music heard by loads of people, but we weren't actually on board for the soundtrack at that point.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of like, oh wow, now this thing that we thought is cool, the rest of the world thinks is also like it is cool as well. So it'll be really heartbreaking if we don't get to do the soundtrack. But fortunately, we did.
Yeah. And do you think now that you've done kind of No Man's Sky and that's kind of obviously put away now for you, do you think that now you're like, I know I want to do another game, but I want to do this type of game? Do you ever think kind of you'd like to do something else other than like the big grand space opera?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a compositional and technical perspective, making music with game engines is a fascinating territory because everything just becomes non-linear and dynamic and responsive, and there's just so many different ways that you can think about music. Like that was such a crash course for us in thinking about music in new ways. It's something we've always tried to do, I suppose. So yeah, we'd absolutely love to do more soundtrack work, and yeah, it would be nice to show that we have a bit more range, I guess, because we've previously, I mean, our music does have a sort of big, or a lot of our music has a big sort of cinematic or sci-fi kind of
feel, sound.
But we can do a lot more, like if you dig into our songs, there's little string sections and stuff. It's just they might be buried underneath loads of distorted guitar or breakbeats, but we can do it. We can do that. But also the problem is obviously there's 1,000 composers out there, and if you're coming at it as a composer as a composer for hire, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but if you're a working composer, then it's less about your, no, that's a bad way of putting it, but you're expected to be able to do any sort of genre and and tailor your needs to the project, to the game. And we've not come at it from that. We've been a band first and foremost, and it's very hard to sort of detach us, and maybe it's an ego thing, I don't know, and especially because No Man's Sky, they said just be 65 Days of Static. So
nice.
Well, yeah, it's nice, but we've kind of we've always been allowed to sort of do what we want, really. And so as much as I would love to do more soundtrack work, I don't really want to, if we got the call to do the next
big thing,
I don't know, like Call of Duty, I'm not sure. I'm not sure we could do it justice. It's just like it's just not our thing. Or say like Warcraft or something. That kind of these are sort of fantasy stuff. I don't know.
Do you think that you've Do you think you've inspired other bands to do the same?
I mean, I hope so. We've been around for long enough. That I mean, I'd like to think that that we've given some other people some good ideas. But do you mean specifically with computer games, or?
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about No Man's Sky is that it was. I mean, I think it's been a long time coming, but music is slowly starting to get more consideration, more respect,
more traction. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like it's not just an afterthought that's quickly put into the game. And you know, a lot of the time, especially in the indie world, where there's a lot smaller budgets and it's just a very complicated thing. And very often, it's the sound designer is probably a musician too, and so does the soundtrack. And sound designing is incredibly complicated, and you sort of need to be a musician even if you're not making music. So of course, like if there's already a composer there, why wouldn't you? I think No Man's Sky, I mean, it was groundbreaking for so many reasons. But what I would like to think, like the small little part that we played in it, is that we were like a live band, and you know, we're pretty tech savvy, and have become a lot more so since No Man's Sky. But we weren't like fully fledged software developers.
No.
You know, we could muddle our way through some basic code, but that wasn't our speciality. But coming from the other direction were various sort of audio frameworks, computer game engine frameworks that meant that people like us could actually get involved in a much more like integrated and complex way, without necessarily needing that absolute sort of specialized skill. And like in the last 5-6 years, well, it's even longer than that now, isn't it? Since the game came out.
At some time.
That's like the sort of the barrier to entry has dropped even further, I think. So I would like to think that musicians, younger musicians, or less tired musicians, who look to us for, you know, might have been like, oh right, okay, you know, I'm not super techie, but I see that doesn't necessarily stop me from. And
so I wanted to ask you another question, kind of coming on from that and what you were saying about the tech and stuff, is your new project, Wreckage Systems. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because that seems quite interesting.
Wreckage Systems is an endless broadcast of generative music, which can be found on the internet at 65daysofstatic.com or on our YouTube channel with the accompanying visuals. That was because, you know, No Man's Sky, we were just sort of, I mean, it's very, you know, No Man's Sky is very much responsible for this sort of evolution of what we do. And when we were working on that record, we were actually, after the record, when we were working on building the kind of all of the material for the dynamic soundtrack, we were up in Sheffield. The rest of the team were in Guildford. We were really quite isolated and left to our own devices, and we didn't have access to the game. Or the game engine. We were kind of. It was quite hard to sort of conceptualize or hear what all of these ingredients would sound like. So we ended up sort of building these systems ourselves, learning various bits of new software, things like Unity or Fmod or Wise, these like game engine things. We would learn to use them purely so we could throw all of our music into them and actually hear what it was going to sound like, and then pass it on to Paul Weir and the team to actually put into the game. Like all we ever did was deliver raw audio. So so in our little bubble, well, it was like we delivered raw audio and then like pages and pages of notes saying, okay, these go here and these go here and these go here. And he actually put it all into the game. So we spent all of this time learning all of these new skills, and the project finished, and we were like, okay, what would happen if we used all of this but applied it to us? Like what can happen if you apply all this to a band rather than it being a subset of like someone else's vision? Like it's just like what can we do? And then so the very next thing we did was something called decomposition theory, which was like these algorithmically driven live AV shows where everything would be different every night because algorithms were sort of spitting stuff out and we'd react to it. And it was really interesting. It wasn't very much fun. It was really hard, and it was quite uncomfortable being stood on stage, not knowing what was going to happen next.
Wow.
So that was like a worthy experiment, but like not one that we're likely to repeat. And so, but we were still like, okay, but there's this, as I said earlier, it feels like there's a huge amount of potential here that's like legitimately unexplored. And coming from the music industry doesn't feel like it's full of potential. It feels like it's been dying for the last 20 years. It feels like a dinosaur. It's backwards looking in so many ways. I still love albums as an art form, but I've never understood why bands are supposed to just make records and go on tour. And like any sort of evolving that they've done, it's in the kind of social media space, which is like a whole other conversation. But it's like it's not. I'm much more interested in new forms for music, new ways of composing, new ways of presenting music, and so all of this led to Wreckage Systems, which is like it's built in Unity, it's built using WISE, it's built using the tools that you would normally use to make music or sound design for games. But we've just gone, but okay, rather than make a game, because we're not. I don't know how to make a game, but I do know how to make music. Let's use all of these techniques that people use to soundtrack video games, and because there's music that can respond to outside control or player agency and whatever. Let's like use these tools to make music that changes and is always different. But let's do it for our own ends, and so we did, and it ended up being like an infinite broadcast of 65 different autonomous music systems that all make music in different ways. They're all recognizable as themselves, but every time one pops up on the broadcast, it's gonna sort of manifest a unique version of its own little thing.
One of the things you kind of touched on was about, obviously we talked a lot about technology and stuff, and obviously we're going through the pandemic and we're kind of hopefully coming out the other side now. One of the really clever things that I found that some artists were using social media to kind of get closer to their fans almost. I don't know whether you're aware, but like we had the Sophie Ellis-Bextor did the kitchen discos every Friday, which was huge for certainly my mental health, because I was stuck in the house all day, all week, not seeing anybody. And it was just a way to release. Kylie did it with her Infinite Disco, across the world, and then a band called My Life Story, which we were talking about earlier, they released an album and they did a gig on the back of it online, and it just boggles my mind that even now you don't really see that happening anymore, or kind of groups, individuals, they're not using the kind of internet in that kind of really clever way. Because personally, I will hold my hand up and say, I will pay you X amount of money, or whatever you want, so that I can watch you online doing your thing. Because to me, it's like having you in my sitting room. And I love that. And I think it's fantastic. It's really a shame that we don't see more of that, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I don't know what the Kylie thing was, but I do know the Sophie Ellis-Bextor thing. And I wonder how much of that is that, like, one of the great promises of the internet was the kind of or what it brought about at least, was the sort of on-demand nature of entertainment. So you didn't have to tune in at a particular time. You could kind of pull your entertainment whenever you wanted it. And then what was lost there is the sort of social aspect of the sort of community aspect of knowing, like, I remember being a teenager before the internet, when something was on TV the night before, and then
like Top of the
the
Pops.
next day, everyone would talk about it, and like there's the possibility of shared
experiences,
cultural moments, social moments, experiences. But of course, we're now also alienated from each other, and what's encouraged is this sort of, everyone's got their own version of the world, and so, but suddenly everyone's locked down and just has a bit more time than they had before, and so things that happen at specific times suddenly were feasible, because where else is anyone going to be apart from in front of a screen? But now we're no longer locked down, so I don't know. I don't know how that
will pan out.
Will pan out, and in the meantime, like, I see what you mean. Like, I enjoy watching, like, it's not every band, but certain types of live shows on YouTube or whatever. But then the other problem is that all of that stuff's already there, and will be there forever. And if like 65, my band, we considered this on and off during lockdown, but we were in different countries, so it was just insurmountable logistically, and still wonder about it. But it's like an investment of some cash to do it well, and then it's still a niche. People do seem to be paying for online. Maybe there's a future there. I don't know. What is interesting is for record systems, we run it as a Patreon model. Like the actual record system stream is free, and it'll always be free. But then the Patreon model, it's got the usual things like a Discord channel, and there's blogs, and we kind of get like deeper dives into the technical side of things. And then there's also releases that people can buy on Bandcamp, but they'll get them free.
Awesome.
It's the Patreon, that kind of thing. And it's not a perfect model. We have to be very careful. And this is the other thing, to sort of keep like generating content and like long-lasting music or art or whatever. Like these need to be different things. Especially when you're talking about generative music, because technically we could just churn it out every week, but that's not the point. Anyway, I'm
no, it's really interesting. But my final question would be, and this is a quick one for you. So what's next for 65? Can you talk about it?
You're not gonna get many. You're not gonna get any exclusives, I'm afraid. It's all a bit. We the first year of Record Systems recently sort of drew to a close. We called that the end of season 1, because we were sort of just building version 2 of Record Systems. Like the first one came online, and then for the first year we were actually now we really want to improve this, and people sort of followed along, and it was like a really nice arc. And then we launched what you see now, which is version 2 of Record Systems on the stream, and took a break, because that was in a typical, like a classic 65 tactic. We sort of overpromised and then had to keep delivering like week after week, and it was a massive undertaking. And I'm really proud that we pulled it off, but we just needed a break on that.
You know what? And that happens. It happened with me with this. I took a long break, mainly due to technology, bloody thing. But I totally get you sometimes need to take that break.
Get a bit of perspective on it, and there's definitely plenty that we would like to explore in the whole Record Systems project as a sort of it's just another track
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, we're starting to think about the band as a sort of like, you've got the sort of old school, old fashioned track where it's putting out records every 3 or 4 years and going on tour. But then there's this kind of back channel for the fans who are more interested, where there's things that appear on Bandcamp that aren't on Spotify.
Yeah.
Things like Record Systems can exist, and it's a more experimental space that's incredibly valuable to keep us creative, like creatively ticking over. And fans who are more interested can support us, and that's really good. But because we've been doing that back channel stuff for quite a while now, it'd be good to try and, you know, write a new record. But I mean, the big trap for every band, the one that we take very seriously, is that we should never write another record just because it's time to write another record.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be a sort of a reason and an intent. So we're kind of like exploring, like the exploratory phase of new records, because you feel we want to do something, but we don't know what it is yet. And so, I mean, so maybe that will come quick, or maybe it'll be some other projects.
Yeah.
In the meantime, as that sort of slowly warms up.
Fab.
So we will see. We're making it up as we go along, like we always do.
Like everybody, especially the minute. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you for coming on, agreeing to be on the show. It's been a real honor. And
pleasure.
Good luck with Record Systems, and good luck with whatever comes next.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you. See you next time.
Right. Okay, bye.